Hey, this is Sabrina Monarch of Monarch Astrology and Magic of the Spheres podcast. I'm so excited to be talking to you about this full moon in Libra, which I think is really about dreaming for more than what currently is and dreaming past the limitations that we've been experiencing and that we've been experiencing historically. The reason why I say this, it's not just the full moon in Libra by itself. So this is the chart we're looking at. Ignore the house placements. It's a local chart for Greece. This full moon is happening April 12th in the States, April 13th in Europe. So the day before the lunation, we have the Sun and Chiron coming together for an exact conjunction or a Chiron Cazimi. And they're still very close to each other at the time of this full moon in Libra. The lunation is ruled by Venus because Libra is a Venusian sign. And within an hour of the full moon being exact, Venus stations direct after her retrograde, and she's stationing conjunct Saturn. So that's a really strong signature, that Venus-Saturn conjunction. I already did a video on this channel called Eros and the Obstacle about how, our highest erotic visions and ideals are actually bound up with why they've maybe been so hard for us, like that kind of anticipation and lead up, the kind of rare gem at the end of a long struggle, like the way that intensifies what we value, the sense of struggle that's gone into it. But I go deeper into that concept in the video, right? Because there's a lot of, spiritual thinking about ease and how things can be easy. But when it comes to like the deeper grit of our soul life, like people go through some hardcore things on the way to realizing their deeper dreams and the things that they care about the most. So Venus, Saturn, together in Pisces. I'm going to unpack this in more depth, but I think it has a lot to do with dreaming beyond the limitations of culture. And I think that, here, I'm just going to build this argument, if you will. So, by the way, if you haven't already liked this video, subscribe to my channel at some point while you're watching. Do leave a comment just to say hi or let me know what resonated with you and how you're doing. So Venus in Pisces is a big, romantic, sensual, aesthetic, erotic appetite. She wants the best of the best. She is lavish. She is extravagant. She wants the things in life that go beyond simple survival. Like she really wants to thrive. And so depending on your, personal aesthetic or desire nature, or romantic nature, it's like Venus in Pisces wants the fairy tale. She wants the real romance. She wants the soul connection. Sometimes even she can, for natives, people that have Venus in Pisces natally, she can relate to these kind of weird love affairs, right? Things that don't actually go well on paper or wouldn't be, the person that you're excited to bring home to your parents. It could be a forbidden love affair. And I think that the purpose of that, while sometimes these relationships that are dysfunctional or not quite good on paper, create a lot of suffering and despair and sometimes dysfunction, or they can come from an addictive place. The function of being that romantically enamored, right, of having your whole erotic body open to someone that's not good on paper, is that it kind of flips upside down or dissolves your attachments to being a normal, conventional person in society. And I think that that's part of what Pisces is doing. It's like this sign about transcendence and also the deeper philosophical question of, well, how to live, because we're also human, right? Pisces is a double-bodied sign, having one foot in reality and one foot in the dream. So Venus in Pisces, when we talk about going beyond survival, it's also an attitude about how we relate to our lifestyle, or our romantic life, where we're considering not just what we can afford, or what is reasonable, but what's possible beyond that. And so it would be less of a short-term pragmatic way of thinking and more of like, what bigger dream am I investing in? What's the point of even being here, of even living, if I'm not enjoying myself or tuning into what I really desire and dream for? And it's interesting when I think about Venus Saturn together in Pisces, I have been thinking a lot this Venus retrograde about a lot of Venusian things, but one thing that I've reflected on is like how much kind of romantic energy is bound up in like provision or a provider, and where relationships come together for these kind of practical, social, or even status reasons versus like a deeper hunger that I see and feel in Venus and Pisces. I have this placement natally. And so for me personally, it's like I dream of that deep, romantic, magical, like fireworks, epic kind of love. And I have had it before, so I know it's possible. And it is, quite a thing to integrate into daily life, because it's always made the prospect of like a conventional or boring relationship or a relationship for safety or survival just like not a thing to me. I have no interest. I want something grand, something fantastic, etc. And so I've always had a hard time since I was a kid understanding like why would people get together for security? Like what's the point? And fair to mention also that I experienced security growing up, so it wasn't something that I was searching for or hungering for. Anyway, that's Venus in Pisces. But put her with Saturn in Pisces, and we're talking about the culture, right? Cultural norms, society, standards. Saturn in Pisces, there's a little bit of a flexibility in reality of like, okay, what are the limits? What are the boundaries? What's real? And it has me thinking about where we make culture a god, right? Like where the way things are in society is just the way it is, right? And this is a very Saturnian thing, regardless of what sign it's in. But with Pisces, we can always look at where we are deifying things that aren't God, right? When we're putting kind of infinite or ultimate proportions onto things that aren't infinite or ultimate. And so cultural norms, right? Like this is just the way my parents and my grandparents did it. This is just the way we do it here. This is just the way life is like a very Saturnian attitude. And we can question, if you put Venus in Pisces as a dreamer next to Saturn in Pisces, I think there is a deeper thing that's working in the collective right now of like, well, what do I really want? And is it actually possible? And dealing with that friction internally of maybe having a desire come up that we're questioning if it's probable, possible, something that even exists in the reality. So Venus conjunct Saturn, I think this brings up themes around building a more visionary, exalted kind of life, visionary relationship and relational dynamics, ones that possibly transcend the general normalized limitations of culture, its intergenerational traumas, various oppressions, and less than inspiring cultural norms and mediocrities. That this is just the way it is attitude. And I think that this shows up a lot in, in dating, say, in that kind of sentiment of there's no good men out there, or women just want money, or whatever the kind of like jaded attitude is, and the sense that there might be a lot of evidence for those attitudes because whatever the culture is doing at large, what's trending, what's normal, it's like that's what you experience most of the time, unless you put yourself in, different environments that are more of a different kind of culture, or drawing together people based on like a higher principle or something like that. And so if you are kind of looking out into the reality of like, well, this is just how much money people make, right? Like in, growing up in the States, for me, it always felt like, you can just be an entrepreneur. Like you can invent like a life for yourself. My experience in other countries, there's a lot more of like a heavy blanket that I feel in terms of this kind of financial oppression where people don't dream as much of wealth or the possibility of it, and it's like not even on the table as a possibility in the same way that, and people, there's the disillusionment of the American dream and issues in America for sure. But, thinking about that as well of like, Is the love that I seek possible? Are there enough people that are overcoming cultural limitations and traumas to like really love in a deep way? Or is this just the way it is? Is it possible to have a life where I have more leisure or time to develop my talents and hobbies, or spend more time with my family, etc.? Or do I just have to grind to survive? And this moment kind of engaging, how is this showing up in our relational appetites or relational frictions? I think that the sun conjunct Chiron and Aries is bringing in maybe this spark of individualism, possibly. That's like, I want something more for myself and for my life. And then kind of projecting that into relationship, moon in Libra. And, if you are interacting with people, or if, who are really inspiring in how they're living their life, right? And you're collaborating in this dream together, or if you are maybe starting a fire, like kind of starting a spark of maybe there's more that's possible here, guys. Like maybe we could dream for more. And like, you're the one who's taking that lead or that step. But I think there's maybe a field of kind of like startup and agitation, like, come on, like, let's really live, like, let's do something more. Like, let's not just be in this cultural malaise. I think that that might be a theme with this full moon. On the other hand, though, there is something about Venus, Saturn, and Pisces that I wanted to mention about if the attitude is dominated with a sense of futility, right, which is a very Saturn kind of energy of like, why even dream? Why even desire? Like there's a limit. There's a limit to how much I'll desire or let myself experience my, desire for pleasure or wealth or love or whatever, because I don't even believe it's possible. And it hurts. It hurts so bad to even want that. So I'm not going to dream. And also, when you're living with that kind of collapsed possibility, how do you cope? Where do you find your pleasures, right? And this tendency within Pisces for escapism, for numbing, it could be kind of like I was thinking deeply and maybe differently about it this last week. But just kind of noticing, like one of the things with Venus, Saturn is like noticing our judgments, right? Like judgments that we have of ourselves, of others, of society, of how people ought to be. And how we might be refining some of those, or maybe even kind of getting more fanatical about what those standards and judgments are, or we might be dissolving, healing, kind of forgiving some of them. So for example, I don't like alcohol that much. I do indulge every once in a while, but for me, it wouldn't be kind of like a lifestyle thing or something that I do very often. And I think that there's something about like a collusion perhaps between not living our dream life, like not having our dreams realized into our actual mundane, ordinary reality, like not feeling that sense of transcendence or fulfillment in the material reality, what actually is that, seeking these kind of moments of escapism, grinding, working hard during the week, and then kind of going to excess partying on the weekend and repeat. It's like we can examine maybe the ways that our escapist tendencies or addictive tendencies, if they are that, actually just reinforce a status quo, right? It keeps us on the wheel or kind of tapped into the loop of how things are, because any of that, resource energy that we might devote, some time and space and cultivation of more life force toward, building something else in our life or endeavoring towards something is getting siphoned into these, temporary highs that then, there's the hangover and the, like getting back on your feet and then starting the whole thing over again. And so it's actually harder with Saturn to, delay some pleasures or delay instant gratification and work toward a long goal. And at the same time, there might be themes coming up with the Venus, Saturn, and Pisces around asceticism, right? Of like, I'm not going to party ever. It's bad. Or I'm not going to have casual sex ever. I'll just wait for the husband. Like, whatever the kind of purity judgments are, or like how we ought to behave. And if there's a process right now going on of, yeah, getting really responsible and cutting some of this excess energy waste on temporary highs, or if there's like a loosening of like, okay, live a little, have some fun. You don't have to be so serious all the time, depending on what's going on for you personally. But I do think that's a theme for this lunation for this time period also. So to summarize that, what I've been saying so far, there is a possible depression of our idealism or our notions of like how wonderful, how magical life can be. That sense of, well, it's not even possible, like, wet blanket kind of energy over that. And then the resulting kind of compensations or addictions or copings that go along with that. Or there's the possibility of wanting more from life, right? And the realization, I think, so something I want to offer about this is that culture, like Saturn in the form of culture, does not always permit or celebrate that. Some family structures are very demanding of conformity, right? Or like, you need to get married, you're getting too old. Like, why aren't you married? Why don't you have kids? Or why are you bringing shame upon the family, right? So like this kind of sense of breaking out, of doing something different may not only not be supported or celebrated, but it might be met with a lot of aggression or hostility or anger or vitriol even. And I think that is part of, a like a cultural codependency that's happening where people, have given themselves to, they've sacrificed maybe some of their own individuation or desires and, did what they were supposed to do and like had the family, had the job. And when they see people stepping out of that and wanting more freedom for themselves, they're like, how dare you do that? I didn't get to do that. Like, get back down, submit, be one of us. It's really intense that culture does that, honestly. And so when I see that Sun Chiron conjunction in Aries, I mean, it looks like maybe the figure, an individual who's fed up, maybe who's wounded by the culture in some way, or feels it that way. So someone who, rather than, you know, succeeding at all the expected status symbols or being cool or like being the star athlete or, having the hot family or whatever, like, hot spouse, like kids that excel, whatever. And that sense of like, I'm not enough or like, I don't fit in, I didn't make it, or I saw like a Instagram account of this woman who like the premise of her account was that she's like expired and thriving, as in she's like 40 and that her culture looks at her as like a total spinster, but that she had, a very like abusive ex who, when she didn't want to be with him anymore, decided to try to ruin her reputation. And then no one wanted to marry her from her own culture. And that she was like, I don't want in on this. And she's just kind of, she was like actually really wearing the wound as this like identity of like, I'm expired. Like I'm 40, right? My culture doesn't accept who I am. And I'm out here like coaching, guiding other women. Like it was very, very kind of Chiron and Aries, right? So that figure, it can show up in a variety of ways and even more subtly. But it's that sense of like, hey, I'm not happy here. Like I'm not happy in this cultural construct. And I still want love. I still want connection, but I don't want to do it this way. And that there's actually a lot of people that feel that way, regardless of how they are, belonging or conforming or non-conforming to whatever extents to what the cultural norms are. But I'm just thinking about the way that culture doesn't always celebrate or give permission for individuation. It does after a long journey where it's like maybe someone individuates, develops something, is a little bit iconoclastic in some way, and creates something that people celebrate or that changes the culture. Any change maker, culture maker has had haters and people that loved what they were doing. So at some point in the story, there may be that sense of, return or recognition or whatnot, but doesn't happen at the outset. And so just thinking about like, if you are feeling that kind of, I want something more from life, and it's more than what is currently culturally prescribed, or it's more than what there's currently tracks that easily accessible for me to have, it's like looking toward that own spark of individual creative fire that's coming through, and also like how that's showing up in relationship. That could be relationships with, inspiring friends, mentors, getting in connection with people that are on the path, a similar path that you might want to be on. And one thing that I'm thinking about as well here is that, look at where you are on this, in this archetypal spectrum, because you might have individuation impulses and have that kind of like nagging anxiety of like, well, what will my family think of me? What will my culture think of me? Am I going to be successful or not? Like, maybe I should just settle and find like, a nice person and just have a life, right? But if you feel like this sense of you're not really honoring that deeper, more, beyond its time or beyond the culture impulse that you feel within, right? And if you're having to develop some more courage or thicker skin, even, or like there's some nervous system and trauma healing, even to like develop a nervous system that can handle not being liked, right? Like this could be full moon and Libra theme, releasing the need to be liked. Or if you are a person who actually, at whatever level you're willing to admit, doesn't like to see people win and excel. Where when you see people get ahead, if you will, or win in life or make something for themselves, you know, thrive in whatever way that you're like kind of happy for them because you feel like you should be, but you also kind of hate them for it, right? Or you really resent them for it. And looking at an inner transformation of judgment and heart. And this can happen through like a prayer practice or a forgiveness practice, where, are there people who you don't really like to see them win? You think they have enough good things. And if something bad happened to them, if like they kind of had a fall from grace or experienced some kind of loss, that a little part of you would rejoice at like, haha, like they had it coming, like they can't, fly that close to the sun forever. Like really look at that, like if you have a moral transformation of that part of your consciousness, you will also give yourself greater permission to move beyond the limitations that you're defending, basically. When people are like, this is just the way it is, or, it's all this trauma, like it's just the generational trauma. This is just how we behave. This is just how I am. This is how, like that's just defending the limitations. And there's a compassion inside of that. There's an understanding inside of that, but there's not like a strong thread of moral integrity inside of it where it's just like, this is just the way we are, like whatever, and to also detach, people have a lot of projections upon like authority figures or people in power or people who, are like high up in the world in some way because of the level of corruption or exploitation that might be happening, depending on who we're talking about. And the person who follows their kind of daimon, like their kind of soul vision, who pulls themselves out of like the swamplands of whatever muck they have inherited from their culture, all of those limitations where they've like did this inner work to not be so codependent or attached to those traumas and cultural norms, and they are excelling in some way. They are excellent. These are all kind of Saturn words. They're not necessarily just people that we lump into a category of, oh, they must be bad. They must be exploiting people. They must be harming people because, that's what the people up there do. And I think that there's this kind of general depression inside of culture that's really common inside of that cultural codependency of like, belonging means being one of us. Don't get too high. Don't get too full of yourself. Unless the culture contains a kind of hierarchy and there's like people going through these prescribed ways of climbing to a higher place. At the moment, it's hard, there's not like that kind of exists, but I think there's more of a divide in the consciousness on a broader scale at the moment. That's a little bit of a half-baked thought, so I'm not going to get too deep into it, but it would be a worthwhile thing thinking about for Saturn, though, of just like Saturn is that ability to climb, to get footholds, like to find these footholds on the mountain so you can get to a higher place, get to a better life. And the thing that separates just, dreamers who don't do anything and don't act on their dreams to people who realize dreams are people who can find those subtle footholds of what step will advance me in the direction that I want to go in now. What mentor, what guide, what teacher, what community, what vision I have personally, what step, and actually really strategizing how to create that life. That takes a lot of energy. And again, that is energy that can easily be wasted into an addiction or some kind of sedative that keeps us stuck in the same place. So that's mostly what I have to say about the full moon in Libra. I think that it is bringing up a kind of release of some patterns in relationship. And the release or the change of heart, there's like a personal maybe fire that's being lit in terms of our own individuation process, and that we're kind of contending with these deeper dreams of like what we really want in this life. And some of these dreams are very painful to even relate to because they feel at times very far away from what is, or there's a sense of, oh, it's impossible. I can't have that. And I think there's something at this moment about becoming more sober, responsible for what we're dreaming, and also devoted to realizing it, to connecting with that part of ourselves that wants more in life, right? And I did want to add that, Venus in Pisces has this immense appetite for the best of the best. And there is a receptive element to that. It's like having the desire, having the longing, being willing to receive. But I wanted to also put something in here about service and giving, in that when we are orienting to what do I want? What's my dream life, right? Like there can be a very personal thirst, right? Or like even like a selfishness inside of that of like, I want all the nice things. I want to be adored. I want someone who admires me. Like I want I'm kind of like me. What do I want? And, I don't shame that around here because I'm like fucking Aries sun, Taurus moon. So I'm very, indulgent in my own ways. And it's not just about that. Like actually part of what taps us into an ecosystem of service and gifting and abundance in the cosmos on Earth, it's about cultivating and tending, stewarding, serving life, serving our gifts, being the offering. There's of course learning curves within that about how to not be, overly self-sacrificial or being a martyr, or like discovering what our true kind of integrity or boundaries are around offering, but when you, if you're really dreaming of like the world that you want to live in, and what you would like to be receiving from that world, chances are there's something in that vision also where it's like, well, what are you creating and offering and sharing into that dream world? And I think that there's something, even with Venus and Saturn and Pisces, it's like our collective or our cultural heart, right? The things that maybe personally trigger, activate us, or break our heart about the way that the world is, and how that might be bound up with our own, offering or gift. For me, it's like I feel this kind of like frustration at times of, we could be more, like we could be advancing, like we could be, living to our potential, and with like touch and like the erotic, like attuned, like really caring, creative, like sensual touch, not just grabby, random, haphazard, extractive, selfish touch, right? And that kind of desire that people might care about their sexuality more and cultivate it more. It's like, that's a very, I tuned into like, if that's something that I've been upset about at different times, and currently I'm also undertaking, a new like training and looking at ways to bring more like sexual education and erotic education into my work and what I offer. And the reason for doing that is because I care about it so much, and realizing that like, it's beyond survival in some sense. It's not just about being okay and having basic needs met. It's about connecting with sensuality as a way to connect with the divine. And that it does break my heart that that's not culturally normal, that there's entire kind of lineages or generations that didn't really like serve pleasure, or like elevate or support women in blooming. All the kind of like patriarchal stuff, all the misogyny, like the way that everyone suffers and misses out for that. Like it's this kind of deeper, like finding the peak experience inside of being in a body in terms of sensual life that I both care about so deeply, and I've had my own life-changing peak experiences with that have totally, shifted my whole life in huge ways because of seeing what was possible. And then also being like, why is this not normal? Like, and that level of, at times, frustration or sadness or despair, even that can go inside of that. And so thinking about like, if you do want, it's like also a full moon in Libra, so there could be themes of justice, right? Or wanting like a more just, a more beautiful world, that there is kind of like a way to fight things, right? There's like a whole, and there's systems and whatever that are designed to be checks and to fight oppressions or fight injustices that are happening. And I think also with the Pisces here, with the Venus Saturn, it might be a question of, well, like, how are you creatively engaging the world, your own development, your own relations, so that you are anchoring in a different frequency, something that's closer to the dream. And in that, there is a transcending of culture. And there's a lot of, I hope you're still following me here, but that can be contentious, right? People don't like spiritual bypassing or not acknowledging various privilege and stuff like that. But I think what Pisces is doing in relationship to the world, right? Or like what's happening in the world, it's the part of us that wants to see beyond the current limitations of the material reality and connect to something beyond, right? Something transcendent. And in connection to that, behave and emanate through the world and create a ripple effect that is of the nature of that connection. And that process often becomes integrated with facing whatever the cultural barriers and traumas are, Like, for example, if you were really, really devoted to like the deepest love possible, right? Like being love, being in connection with love, you might have a phase where you kind of are, oh, that's like low vibration. I don't mess with that. I have boundaries. Like I don't mess with the low vibration. But the deeper you get into that devotion to love, it's actually going to put you in contact with the, crusty, blocked off, guarded parts of yourself, or like your own low vibrational parts, or yeah, your own kind of traumas and triggers. And if you hold the anchor of that love and connect with what is yours to work through and whatnot, the love only gets deeper, right? So devotion and anchoring into something higher, rather than being an escape to the world and its problems, can often be a way of navigating, a more inspired way of interfacing with the world. And when we talk about like the amount of energy that it takes to go against what's normal, right? To not just fall asleep in the malaise of whatever is happening and just find your little pleasures where you can find them and deal with what is, you need a higher energy source. And in Pisces, that can often look like something divine, right? A connection to spirit, a connection to God, a connection with the source, however you want to look at it. That can be quite an anchor, quite an energy source for having the kind of internal divination and intuition of how am I to participate, but also having that faith or energy from a higher source, if you will, to participate. And again, a lot of spiritual this is something that's coming to mind now, but I've been having these really fascinating conversations lately, encountered some kind of like Christian mystic type of people, and also thought about what I know about Christianity and how like, it has its issues, but it is like a very social religion, right? It has like a structure, if you will. And this idea of like service or, yeah, all of that. And then the more like out there fringe spiritual things, I think can sometimes go into like these more exploratory, covering new ground, maybe pioneering experiences in spirituality. But there is a lot of like, say, spiritual consumerism or just making it all about me, or spiritual narcissism or something like that. And whatever, solo practice or group relationship you have with spirituality, I think that not having service as part of it, like not thinking about how you are part of a chain of like receiving and also gifting, like if serving and giving and creating isn't part of it, I think something gets kind of kinked in like the flow of energy. So I'm getting a little bit into like a ramble or losing my train of thought here, but I think that it will be, important to think about full moon in Libra, the kind of world that you want to live in, the deeper dreams that you have, and then this kind of like deeper look at, well, how are you relating to that thread of desire, that higher possibility? And how are you acting, Aries, or like how are you sharing your heart or sharing the service that comes from your heart into the world, so that you are, part of this greater level of reciprocity in the cosmos that goes beyond human relationships. It includes human relationships, but it's the energy that you are allowing to come through you, move you, and shape, how you gift and offer your love to the world. So I'm going to leave it at that and remind you that the Evolutionary Astrology Intensive is coming up. It is the last, final cohort. After that, the course will be transforming into something that is more of a self-study experience. I've been teaching this class for 8 years, and it is amazing. It has been such a pleasure to guide people and have this like deep, personal, intimate kind of cohort experience, guiding people into a fluency with evolutionary astrology, which is a soul-based lineage of astrology. And I have found has just been such a door opener for people, like learning how to recognize and feel these archetypes for yourself, to not just understand them as these kind of like book concepts, but as alive, sentient archetypes that you are in relationship with. And that as you heal, and refine your relationship to these different archetypes, it creates these different kinds of flourishing in your world, different types of empathy, ability to understand people. So if you're sharing the craft of astrology with other people, that's super important. But that people have found it really open a kind of like wonder and enchantment in their life. And they have this new skill set, new literacy with astrology. So this course is for people who, have astrology kind of in bits and pieces, and you're wanting to have a more coherent, like whole relationship with astrology, as well as people that just want to go deeper down the Pluto and lunar nodes, or just kind of soul astrology rabbit hole. I'm going to leave the link to the course in the notes and invite you to check it out, learn more about it, and apply there. And do leave a comment. Let me know what you thought about all this and what's been happening in your sphere, what synchronicities you're noticing in relationship to all of this. Thank you so much for being here.